Welcome, everyone, to this week's interview. Today, I'm sitting down with Steve Everett. He is a pop and roll singer from Nashville, Tennessee. His music has been featured in NASCAR Heat 2, 4, and 5, and his latest release, Little Wins. It's a pretty awesome album. I was listening to it before the interview. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, I was telling Steve before the interview that his setup, I think, might be one of the coolest we've had so far. You have this American flag, the cool microphone, and it looks like I don't know if is that like wallpaper behind you, or it looks like the forest is just
Just creeping
coming
up
in.
on me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to make it look. This is like my little studio area, and during COVID, I took it really seriously, and
hmm
so one of the whole walls is covered with this like fake boxwood plant, so it kind of looks
Okay.
like I'm in an outdoor courtyard. And then this is just a giant black and white American flag from America. And I'm actually American. A lot of people don't know that about me. I'm American.
I guess jumping into it, Steve, how did you first get into music? How did you first decide that you wanted to pursue a career in it?
I was actually court ordered. Um, I had no choice in the matter. No, my dad sang opera back in the '70s,
hmm
and he was going to get drafted in Vietnam, and so he signed up because you could always get a better situation if you
hmm
sign up instead of just actually let them call your number. And so he auditioned for this. It was like the one of the only performing arts groups in the military where if you got the gig, you basically just stayed in America, and you didn't have to like go shoot anybody. So he was a singer and he auditioned for the Navy Sea Chanters Choir. And it was like thousands of dudes that auditioned because they wanted to not have to go fight and just sing their way through Vietnam. And so he got it, man. And he did that for 4 years, and then yeah, I mean, he was singing in New York, San Francisco. He was just for a brief time, he was a really successful opera singer. And then he met my mom and wanted to, settle down and stuff. And so she needed a little more stability. And so he became a church choir director. And so, like, my whole life, that's what I've known him as. But that's, I mean, going to learn like handbells and like being in every musical thing that was available in church growing up. And we were, I know there's folks that feel both ways about religion, but
hmm
it really was a fun way to grow up around a bunch of people my age and just so much music. That's really the reason that I enjoyed it.
hmm
Was just handbells, brass choir, like anything you wanted to do. It was available. So my dad is a big reason.
So is there a moment where it goes from okay, like I enjoy doing this, I feel like I'm pretty good at it, I want to pursue this, as my career, or did you have, here's my plan A and music's my plan B or anything like that?
Yeah, I basically knew from the time I was a kid. I think the earliest that I remember knowing, I was
hmm
like 10 years old, just watching. I think we were watching this classical uh, choir concert,
Yeah.
and there was the guy who was directing the choir was introducing the songs in between songs and talking to the audience and like made a couple jokes and just like I felt the whole thing that night. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking like, oh, I want to take people on that type of like, bring them up, laugh, and then
hmm
bring them down, make them cry a little bit, and just you leave. I don't know. I just really enjoyed seeing someone manipulate in a good way the
Yeah.
crowd and like take them on a journey that they decided 6 months ago when they started, booking this tour. They were like, when I get there, I'm going to do this to them, and I just think that's so cool.
Man, that's awesome. I know for me personally, like being in church and seeing people who are super talented, being in college, seeing people who're super talented, it always sucks when you see, after they, I guess they, move away from the church or they leave college and they just leave. They pack up all of that talent and they're like, well, like I'm old now. I can't, do that or whatever. So it's cool when you see people, they're like, no, I want to pursue this. This is cool.
Yeah. I mean, and it's tough. Like the
hmm
reason, that my dad didn't sing opera for longer was because, it's a miserable lifestyle for
Yeah.
someone who loves you. And so like I have a girlfriend, but I've never been married, don't have any kids.
Mhm.
just because like I really do want to continue this lifestyle and keep doing what I'm doing. And I
Yeah.
know that, it gets pretty dicey when somebody's counting on you to be here all the time and you're gone half the time.
Hmm. So as an artist, I feel like the pandemic offered people tons of time to kind of pursue different things when it came to arts. For you personally, is that something you used as a time for creativity? Did you try to dip into virtual touring? How did you kind of use that time now that you weren't just on the road constantly?
Yeah. Uh, I think it was absolutely integral for me.
Hmm.
I'm not very good at taking time off, or uh, I think if you once you get into like the sole proprietorship, self-employed entrepreneurial spirit, it's really hard to turn that off. And I definitely struggle with that. But I know, you know, it's February when right before all this stuff hit of
Hmm.
2020, um, I had started crowdfunding my new record that I put out in April of this year. And like I had all these things that were projects that were scheduled and ready to go.
Yeah.
And I was in trouble. Like I had just run myself ragged and spread myself too thin. And I was not going to ask anybody for help. I wasn't going to stop, touring because I needed to make money. And I had, once you get momentum going, and especially in this business, it feels like you have to keep going.
Hmm.
And, but for me, it just allowed me to be like, hey, what if all your shows were canceled and you didn't have to do it? We'll do it for you. And then you can just stay at your house for like a year and, really get to know yourself. And so I started going on these long walks every day and started, I went on a writing retreat to this cabin in the woods and just wrote most of these songs from this new record. And yeah, luckily the crowdfunding campaign was fully funded, even though it was, halfway through it is when quarantine hit and people had
Yeah.
no idea when they were going to get paid again. But I think maybe it worked because people thought that in the beginning it was like, oh, this is going to be like a 2 week thing, is
Yeah.
what we were told. But yeah, so I just feel really lucky that I had time. Like honestly, COVID is obviously a terrible thing, but
Hmm.
to your point, I think it did offer people, a little time to reflect and maybe make some changes that they've been knowing they needed to make for a long time. And that's kind of what I did. I started walking every day, lost a bunch of weight, um, quit drinking as much,
Hmm.
just clean my act up, man, and really took this new record seriously, and then was able to schedule, write, and record it during quarantine. So I really was able to make the most of the time. But I know a lot of people who just sat around and enjoyed not having to be anywhere
Yeah.
for the first time in their whole life. So really, whatever you did, it was probably good.
Yeah. Um, so growing up, how familiar were you with NASCAR pre, appearing in the video games?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I ate cereal, so I knew about Bobby Labonte and Terry Labonte. I mean, growing up in North Carolina, like you
Yeah.
can't get away from it. You always know somebody whose dad is like on a team or is a mechanic, or two of the guys that played football for App State while I was in college there are gas men now.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, it was in your orbit for sure. But I never really, I think little kids, it's tough to watch like hundreds of laps.
Yeah.
But I definitely knew who the famous drivers were, and saw them on the cereal boxes. And like we all had opinions even though we didn't watch the races. Like for whatever reason everybody hated on Jeff Gordon because like in
Yeah.
the 90s he was the young kind of like metro, like he had hair products, so he must not be a real driver because our dad said that stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of it got passed down. But now that I'm an adult, man, I just understand
Hmm.
the feat of engineering that it is, and the F1. I've gotten really into F1.
Yeah.
But just like the differences between all the racing and then what exactly a stock car is. And I'm way more up to date now than I ever was back in the day.
Yeah, that was growing up, we didn't really have the like the opportunity to go up for most of the races, but me and my dad would go up to just the race shops like 4 times a year. and my friends would be like, "So, are you going to like a race?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just going to the place where they build the cars." And they're like,
Yeah,
"Can you sit in the cars?" I'm like, "Well, no, you can like look through a window and see them." To me, that's what's cool is when you get a little
yeah.
older and you get to immerse yourself in what's happening, what's it takes to get to the track. You know.
Yeah. And I think that's the case with any sport really is, the more you are into sports, really, the more you're just into stories.
Yeah.
And that's why, that F1 series on Netflix has gotten so many of us,
Yeah.
myself included, into F1 because I was like, oh, I just had no idea what was going on. And now that I understand the dynamics of how hard this is and how dangerous this is, yeah, this is crazy. And if they had a NASCAR
Mhm.
one, the reason they can't make that series is because there would be so much language that they wouldn't be able to use if they actually film these drivers
Mhm.
and like all the, fist fights and stuff. Like there's just no way they could air it, but it
Yeah.
would be compelling for sure.
So for me, I found your music through the NASCAR video game series. Um, I remember in the first one them asking people to submit songs and all, but I guess like how did you end up in the second game, as well as I guess the fourth and fifth game as well? How's that opportunity kind of come about?
Yeah. So basically, the first game they did, um, NASCAR Heat, they spent a bunch of money on music,
Hmm.
and then the second one, the first two were made by EA Sports, and like EA Sports has
Yeah.
a big budget, and so for the second one, that's when I got the call saying they had asked for submissions, and I submitted a bunch of stuff, and that's when I got the call saying like, hey, we're going to put you on, and then by the time they made the third NASCAR Heat game, um, it switched off at EA Sports, and so it
Hmm.
was a whole new team, and they didn't realize that they had used independent music for
Yeah.
that second one. I don't think I just don't think they had really like investigated it very much
Uh-huh.
because this company 704 Games out of Charlotte is the one who really makes that game,
Hmm.
and then it's just kind of under the EA umbrella at that time, and so it just kind of fell through the cracks, and they just went with like stock music
Hmm.
for the third one. And then I was like, oh, bummer. This was such a cool thing. And by the time the third one came out, the second one had generated all these people on YouTube and
Yeah.
Instagram and Twitter. Just like people comment every day from that game and are just like the sweetest thing. Like it's
Yeah.
amazing. And so once I saw the value that that added, and how many people were kind of like, riding with me now that they had found out about me, I was just like, well, bummer that they went back to, just
Hmm.
using like canned music, and it made for like more boring gameplay, I thought.
Yeah.
Um, and then luckily when they made Heat 4, I saw that they were taking submissions again, and I was like, oh, this is it. So I ended up getting another song in there, which was so fun.
Uh-huh.
And then for NASCAR Heat 5, I got another call and they put two of my songs in. So like now it feels like I don't know, I feel like I'm a favorite son or something. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I have a second set of parents that are raising me, and I can go, eat a good meal. So it's been amazing. Each time that I've, that they've opened it up,
Yeah.
they've picked my stuff, and it has seriously led, like there's somebody in a mellow yellow jacket at like most of my club shows in the Southeast. And they're just like,
Uh-huh.
hey, I heard about you from the game. And I'm like, right on, brother.
Yeah, I got really excited when they had the independent, because I know for me growing up, like I don't think I've listened to the radio in probably about 10, 15 years. It was always all right,
Yeah.
what's on my iPod? Now it's all right, let me put on my Spotify and let me listen to artists or check out the new artists from there. So for me, it's always been about like the independent music. So when it got on there, I was like, man, this is cool because you have all these guys that, you know, don't necessarily get the radio play.
Right.
So I got super excited. I know for me, I want to say it might have been that same the second game, but like they had like the Pink Spiders on there, and I'm like, I didn't even know they were still a band. Like I remember
Yeah.
listening to them 10 years, and then Greta Van Fleet were on there, and I think that's right before they kind of
Yeah.
started getting pretty big. So I was like, it's like as a fan, I sit there and I say, "Oh, it's just the NASCAR game," not thinking like, "Oh, there's a lot of moving parts outside." It's not that the NASCAR fans are now skyrocketing everyone up the charts, but
Right. Well, and that's, that's kind of what's cool about it though, is that it's a
mhm,
smaller group, But I mean, when we were, I don't know how old you are. When I was in college, like Fallout Boy was on the
Yeah.
Madden soundtrack, and you couldn't play that game without learning every word to the Fallout
Yeah.
Boy record. And it's just like, whatever it was, whatever they picked would have been just lodged in your head for the rest of your life. And I
Yeah.
remember, like, when I was a kid, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, I had like the little sample. They used to have sample PlayStation discs
Hmm.
with like a few minutes of each game. And you
Yeah.
could play like one level, and it had the Goldfinger song Superman was on the Tony Hawk level that you could play. And
Hmm.
so my friends and I played that level like, thousands of times. And we only ever listened to that one song. And it was just such an amazing song that we were just like, let's do it. And so the idea that like I'm a part of that like lexicon is so
Hmm.
cool to me. And I hope there's a kid somewhere that's like, God, I love Steve Everett.
That's awesome. I guess finally, I guess putting on like the what if cap or whatever. If you could tour with any artist, who would you want that tour to be with? You one or two bands.
Yeah, there's a do you know who Wolfpack is?
I think I've heard that name.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty successful. They have the "Put It in My Pocket, in My Back Pocket" song. Put it
Uh-huh.
in my pocket, in my back pocket. Uh anyway, they're just like, they're technically indie, but they're
Hmm.
enormous and they have a huge following. They play like every festival season, but kind of the way their band works is they do these, high paying gigs, and they split the money up evenly among all the members.
Hmm.
And like Corey Wong, who's an incredible guitarist, he's in there. And this guy, Theo Katzman,
Hmm.
who's an unbelievable drummer, singer, guitar player, frontman. He's amazing. Theo Katzman lives in the LA, like on the West Coast, I mean. And his solo records, like they do the Wolfpack thing together, and that's how they pay their bills,
Hmm.
and it's fun and it's really good. And then they all go out and do their solo projects. And like Corey plays with this guy Ben Rector a lot, and a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of other, successful musicians. And then Theo, does his own tours as a solo artist.
Hmm.
And like seriously, Google this guy, Theo Katzman. His records, especially Heartbreak Hits,
Uh-huh.
um, they're just it's insane. It's like it's just really intelligent, um, socially conscious but not douchey.
Hmm.
It's just, and it's so fun and rhythmic, and his voice is so cool, and everything just sounds so good. I mean, it's the type of music you can only make when you don't have to worry about whether anybody likes it or not.
Yeah.
Like they've got their money taken care of with the big project, and then they're free to do their passions. And so it's an unbelievable thing, and I would love to tour with him. He doesn't take himself too seriously,
Hmm.
which I try not to either. And so I think there would just be a lot of energy and self-deprecation and
Yeah.
jokes, and like people would just, I think it would be a really good bill.
Man, yeah, that's awesome. I'll definitely go and purchase some tickets to that, and hopefully you guys come from the Charleston market. That
We'll play the Poorhouse or the Music
Yeah,
Farm.
there you go. Well, Steve, I guess wrapping this up for the listeners at home, if they want to learn more about you or find your music, where can they find you at online?
They can find me at steveeverettmusic.com, or if you're feeling throwbacky, steveeverett.net, because I own both, baby. But yeah, I mean, I'm on social media. I'm everywhere. I would love to add you into my fold, guys. Feel free to follow. I I'm usually team follow back. So
Hmm.
I'll that's I know that's provocative, but I'll say that.
That's what's awesome, and I think what's cool too is getting ready for this interview. I was listening to a lot of your music. That way, I'm like, okay, if it's on the spot, I don't sit there and say like, oh, I forget what song that I liked of yours or whatever. But
Yeah.
that's to me what's cool is when like you have someone that like is a super cool guy like yourself, but also like the music is also good. That way, it's not like, well, he's got a great personality, but his music sucks, or vice
Oh
versa, where it's
man,
like his music's great, but man, he.
what an a-hole. Yeah, there's a whole lot of that in the music industry, so I definitely
Mhm.
understand. But I mean, the same thing goes with podcast hosts.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you'll get an opportunity and you're like, oh, this is like a big podcast. And then you do like the little thing where you're like, oh, what's up, man? Can't wait to do it. And it's like talking to a brick wall, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh no. This is not going to be fun at all.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate having you on, and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for doing a great job, and I appreciate you sharing my story with your folks. And we'll see you again soon, I hope.